Hey guys, it's Ellen Brock, novel editor. Today I'm going to talk about flashbacks, when you might want to use them, and how they can benefit your novel. So when I talk about flashbacks, I'm talking about a scene with some dialogue or some action that conveys some backstory or something that occurred before the start of the novel, as opposed to just ordinary backstory that's explained in exposition by just simply stating that it occurred. Flashbacks are a good option when what occurred in the past is really important and couldn't be conveyed as well through exposition. So perhaps there's a lot of emotional content, or perhaps what occurred is sort of complicated or nuanced, and conveying it through a scene is really more efficient than explaining it through exposition. A good example of this is in The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. Early on we get a flashback about when Peeta intentionally burned bread to give it to Katniss so she could feed her family as they were going hungry, and there are a lot of details that are important. So while it could have just been explained as I explained it to you through exposition, it wouldn't have really had the level of detail nor the level of emotional impact. Katniss even goes so far as to directly explain to the reader why it matters that this piece of backstory be conveyed. I feel like I owe him something, and I hate owing people. Maybe if I had thanked him at some point, I'd be feeling less conflicted now. I thought about it a couple of times, but the opportunity never seemed to present itself, and now it never will, because we're going to be thrown into an arena to fight to the death. Exactly how am I supposed to work a thank you in there? So Katniss tells us exactly why this scene is relevant and why it's important that we pay attention to this bit of backstory. If you've seen the movie of The Hunger Games or you've read the book of The Hunger Games, you know that this incident with Peeta plays a big role in how Katniss acts towards him throughout the novel, and it actually impacts the plot. One of the big mistakes that aspiring writers make when including backstory is that they'll include this big tragic scene, but it doesn't really impact anything about what the character is doing, and it doesn't really have any bearing on the plot. So make sure if you do include a flashback that it really is relevant and that it's impacting your character's behavior. In Chasing Redbird by Sharon Creech, the main character Zinni's goal is to clear a trail that's overgrown. The trail represents to her a way to absolve herself of the guilt that she feels over the death of her cousin and then the death of her aunt. And Creech wisely chooses to show us through a flashback what the death of her cousin Rose was like for her, so that we really understand this basis for her motivation to clear the trail. I kept sneaking in to look at Rose, waiting for her to blink her sleepy eyes and sit up. People said don't touch her, but I did once. I tapped her hand and it scared the beans out of me. It wasn't her hand. It was like a doll's hand, stiff, neither warm nor cold. I studied my own hand, wondering if it was going to turn into a doll's hand like Rose's. The chapter goes on to explain that Rose was placed in a drawer after her death as part of her aunt's belief system. In my 4-year-old mind, I knew I was responsible for Rose being in that drawer, and I waited for someone to punish me. Instead, people kept asking me if I was feeling better and telling me how lucky I was. I didn't feel very lucky. I felt like it was me in that drawer, or as if someone was going to lift Rose out and put me in instead. In Chasing Redbird, the flashbacks really help us to understand Zinni's motivation. So when she spends all of this time trying to clear this trail and absolve herself of guilt, we understand what it's built on, and we understand how she felt during and after these deaths. It's a lot more difficult to convey that level of emotional motivation just by explaining through exposition what occurred, because we wouldn't have felt the same closeness to Zinni as a character. Both Chasing Redbird and The Hunger Games present the flashback relatively early on and pretty directly, but I want to go over another technique that you can use, and that's foreshadowing. In The Thing About Jellyfish by Ali Benjamin, we learn early on that Susie, the protagonist's best friend Franny, passed away. But what we don't learn is how Susie's relationship with Franny actually ended before her death. This is teased to the reader multiple times throughout the novel, but the truth of what occurred isn't actually revealed through a flashback until nearly page 200. When Susie's mother tells her about her friend's death, Susie reacts by saying that her friend's death didn't make sense because the way things ended between us was not the way they were supposed to end. They were not the way anything should ever end. And yet here was my mom. She was right in front of me and she was saying these words. And if her words were true, if she was right about this thing she was telling me, it meant that the last glimpse I'd had of you, walking down the hallway on the last day of 6th grade, carrying those bags of wet clothes and crying, would be the final one I'd ever have. Benjamin continues to use foreshadowing throughout the novel to keep the reader invested and interested in knowing what happened between these two girls before Franny's death. Things had ended between me and Franny in the worst way. If I'd known, I'd have said sorry for the way things happened. I'd have at least said goodbye. But a person doesn't always know the difference between a new beginning and a forever sort of ending. Now it was too late to fix any of it. But maybe I could still do something. Maybe I could prove that there was an actual villain in Franny's story. A villain worse than me. So all of this foreshadowing gets us really interested and invested in what happened between these two girls. Foreshadowing a flashback that will come down the road later on in the novel can be a very effective technique in getting the reader hooked into the story and keeping them invested. If you're considering including a flashback in your novel, it's important to make sure that the event that you're flashing back to is truly an important event in your character's life, and one that really impacts their behavior and how they interact with other characters or the decisions that they make throughout the novel. I will be back on Wednesday with a video about backstory and how you can use backstory to actually enhance your scenes. I will continue to make new videos Monday, Wednesday, Friday throughout August, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. And I'm also hosting a free first page critique on my blog. If you want to submit your work to that, the link is in the description. Happy writing, guys!